On the program today, IMF calls for coordinated action and accountability in COVID-19 battle. Control Risks and Oxford Economics Africa launched the 2021 edition of the Africa Risk Reward Index. And Ghana ranked fourth most attractive labor market in pharmaceutical industry in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you for joining us on Business Incorporated. I'm Chimize Obi Iwago. First, the market numbers, and we'll start off on the African continent. Sentiment was mixed at intraday. The bear still has a strong grip on Nigeria's NGX. It was trading in the red, down marginally at 0.02%, while South Africa's JSE index continued its positive movement, up over 1%. The EGX 30 in Egypt was also up over 0.5%, while Kenya closed negative at the end of Tuesday's session, down a massive 2.49%. In the meantime, major markets were tracking the Middle East. We are trading in positive territory at intraday. Abu Dhabi gained 0.35% and Dubai climbed 0.22%. Elsewhere in the region, Saudi Arabia gained 0.11% and Qatar wasn't left out, adding 0.31%. And we cross over now to Europe. Stocks traded higher in the morning as tensions ease over embattled Chinese property developer Evergrande, and global investors watch for the outcome of the latest meeting of the U.S. Federal Reserve. Investors are also keeping an eye on other developments, and those are what Christy will be talking to us about. Hey, Christy, good afternoon. Well, the OECD has revised down its global economic growth forecast for 2022, saying that recoveries in wealthier countries are being counterbalanced by lower income countries that still have only limited access to vaccines against COVID-19. Can you explain this dynamic for us?
That's right, Chimmy. What we heard from the OECD today is they are seeing healthy economic growth or recovery, I should say, in wealthier nations where businesses have been open consistently, shops as well, and where we're seeing many more people out and about spending money than we were last year, of course. But this is not the case all around the globe. As we know, many countries still don't have adequate access to vaccines. The Delta variant is still very much an issue that's causing breakouts around the globe. Because of this, ultimately the OECD said they had to revise down their forecast for next year by 0.1% to so now they're now expecting global economic growth of 5.7% for 2022. What is the dynamic here? How does this work? Of course, we live today in a globalized economy. No country exists in a vacuum anymore. Particularly, supply chain bottlenecks have been a persistent issue for manufacturers and for really all types of companies and all types of industry around the globe. And as long as countries continue to struggle with outbreaks of the virus, we're going to continue to see these bottlenecks as a drag on the economy. So an overall global economic recovery for everyone is still very much a fragile idea, I would say.
All right, let's come down to Germany, where you are ahead of this Sunday's federal election. Outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel has hit the campaign trail to try and drum up support for her party's Chancellor candidate, Armin Laschet. The Conservative Party candidate has been struggling in the polls. Can Merkel turn things around for him?
Well, she's certainly going to try. The thing about Angela Merkel is she has been incredibly popular as chancellor in her 16 years that she's been in the job. We can't quite say the same for her potential successor, Armin Laschet. At this point, he has, as you said, been struggling in the polls compared to the Social Democratic candidate Olaf Scholz in recent weeks. What we've been hearing from Angela Merkel on the campaign trail is she said in particular that if Laschet were to become chancellor, he would do everything he could to protect jobs in Germany. And this was a very pointed response to something that Olaf Scholz had been saying on his own campaign trail. He recently said that Germany needs to prioritize a swift transition to green energy and to a more progressive economic system, even if that means at the expense of jobs in Germany. So we have to remember that ultimately Germany traditionally has been a very conservative country. It's a country that is very reliant on automobiles, both in terms of how people move about and also in terms of the economy. So it seems that Merkel is trying to push on these pain points and remind voters, what kind of country Germany has been over the last years. Now, what's going to happen this weekend, we'll have to wait and see. Laschet seems to lack a bit of the star power that Merkel has, and many people have said it's finally time for some change after all these years. Whether they put their money where their mouth is at the polls this Sunday, we'll have to wait and see.
We'll wait and see. In the meantime, some analysts have said the high gas prices in Europe could speed up the certification of the recently completed Russia-Germany gas pipeline Nord Stream 2. Now, this pipeline has been controversial from the very beginning. Is this moment that will finally secure its future?
Well, it does seem like an element that could help. Basically, we're seeing very high gas and energy prices for Europeans right now. Some people have even gone as far as to suggest that Russia has lowered its exports of its current exports of gas to Europe for this very purpose, to sort of put a squeeze on Europe and urge them to finally approve this pipeline. Though other people have said that that's not the case. Where are we at with this project right now? The pipeline has been completed. It's physically finished, and German regulators are now in the process of deciding whether they're going to approve it or not. The current timeline would have them making a decision around New Year's, so that's pretty deep into the winter season over here already. So this is certainly something that regulators are keeping in mind, the fact that prices are going up for European consumers and that it's only going to be getting more expensive as the weather gets colder here. But as you said, this project has had its enemies from the beginning, and they haven't really gone anywhere. The U.S. is against it. There are other European countries against this project, and there's an environmental aspect as well that's on people's minds. So German regulators have said that they will consider the European Commission's opinion on the project as they make their decision. The Commission has yet to even make public any sort of stance. That could still take months, so that's one hurdle. And also there's the election this weekend that we were just talking about. If we end up seeing a large representation of Greens in Germany's next government, that will certainly also throw a wrench in the project. So I would say at this point, approval of this pipeline is far from certain, let alone a fast-tracked approval.
Right, we'll continue to keep a track on this and, of course, other developments there in the European space. Enjoy the rest of the day, Christy.
Thank you.
And in the UK, stocks opened sharply higher in London as fears over the Evergrande crisis ease a little. For this and more, we have Juliana now. Hello, Juliana. Good afternoon. Well, the FTSE 100 index jumped by 75 points in the morning. That's its highest levels this week after China's Evergrande struck a debt deal with onshore bondholders ahead of interest payment later this week. Now, is the market still holding up that sentiment this intraday?
Good afternoon, Chimi. Yes, the market very much in positive territory in London. I've got to say it's mainly to do with the oil majors. A barrel of Brent crude is trading up 1.3% higher. So BP and Shell are really pulling up the FTSE 100. I believe their shares are up between about 2 and 2.23%. As you said, Evergrande, a major global news story. There was a slight bit of relief after a statement was released by the Shenzhen Stock Exchange confirming that some sort of deal has been made about this interest rate payment on a domestic bond has been resolved. However, it was really lacking in detail, and there is a further payment that is due to be made on international bonds. However, it does appear as if international bond markets have already priced in massive losses due to this recurring debt. There are a couple of stock markets, as you know, that are closed in Asia, so it's still all to be seen on whether or not, this crisis is over. I think the answer to that is obviously going to be no. But at intraday, the FTSE All-Share is up by 1.05%. The FTSE 100 also up by 1.22%, and the FTSE 250 is up by 0.59%. In the currencies market, the British pound down on the US dollar by 0.10%, also down on the euro by 0.18%, but up on the Japanese yen by 0.24%, Chimay.
In the meantime, U.S. Federal Reserve interest rate decision is on the radar for investors. What are the expectations from where you are?
Yes, it is on the radar. In fact, we're probably going to be getting some minutes anytime from now. Jerome Powell will be talking about when the U.S. economy will start tapering down on its massive stimulus program. And I would suppose it's also, when it comes to interest rates, it's when and not if they're going to be hiked up. Potentially before the end of the year, perhaps at the start of next year. But as we were just talking about Evergrande, massive story. And of course, I know you were just speaking in Frankfurt about the OECD and them downgrading the forecast for economic growth at the end of next year. This Evergrande story, which of course we know real estate and China's growth strategy contributes heavily to the world's second largest economy. So I think a lot of central bank governors will want to wait and see how that shapes out before they start deciding whether they're going to taper back or start hiking interest rates. Of course, tomorrow we've got our own Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee meeting taking place. A couple of months ago, there were unanimous votes about not raising interest rates, but we are starting to see one or two deputy central bank governors deciding that now's the time. So yes, although we're looking stateside, we're also focusing very much on what's going to be happening tomorrow.
We'll keep an eye on that. In the meantime, a real scandal which saw an estimated 134,000 pensioners, mostly women, miss out on pension payments has been exposed. What more can you tell us about this report by the National Audit Office? And how does the government hope to deal with this?
Yeah, this is being described as a £1 billion scandal, as you said, involving the majority of elderly women from less privileged backgrounds that may not have had the opportunity in their working career to contribute or participate in a private-owned pension. They were relying on the government's pension, the state pension, and this goes back now to, I believe, some cases to the early 80s. And that's because the National Audit Office have confirmed that at the time, a lot of the paperwork and the computing systems were outdated, management were overworked, staff were not looking through the data properly. And basically, a lot of these women were supposed to get an increase on their state pension if their husband died, if their husband had turned 80. So they would take a lump sum of what their husband had contributed, and that would be given to them. Sadly, it wasn't. An investigation done by This Is Money and other broadcasters did discover that over 140,000 women were affected. They were underpaid. I believe there's one case where a lady is owed over £138,000. And the sad thing is, about 40,000 individuals who should be getting some of this backdated money, they've died. And unfortunately, the Department for Work and Pensions erases details after 4 years. So it's a huge scandal. Of course, Prime Minister's questions has already taken place. That was spearheaded by the newly appointed Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson, of course, is attending the United Nations General Assembly in America. But I do believe now that this findings have been released, that this is likely to become a major scandal that the government will need to address.
Let's just hope they do that. Thank you, Juliana. We keep an eye on the BOE's meeting tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, we'll take a break now. And when we come back, we'll look at the recently launched Africa Risk Reward Index. This and more in a moment. So stay with us. leading global specialist risk consultancy Control Risks and Oxford Economics Africa have launched the 2021 edition of the Africa Risk Reward Index, which examines and reveals the longer-term impact of COVID-19 on Africa. The Africa Risk Reward Index is an authoritative guide for policymakers, business leaders and investors, and illustrates the evolution of the investment landscape in major African markets and provides a grounded longer-term outlook of key trends shaping investment in these economies. Well, Tim Cox, partner West Africa at Control Risks, joins us now to share his insights and views on Africa's post-pandemic and unpack the major themes featured in the report. Thank you very much, Mr. Cox, for joining us on the program. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Great to be back with you.
So tell us more about Africa Risk Reward Index and its importance to policy making and investment in Africa.
Sure. So we have been publishing this report along with our partners, Oxford Economics Africa, since 2017. And as you mentioned in the introduction, it provides a snapshot of the evolution of the investment environment across the major economies in Africa. And it fundamentally is a comparative snapshot. So we measure two different aspects within our methodology, focusing both on the rewards based upon potential investment, but also the potential risks associated with it. And in addition to that, each year we identify a number of key trends or themes that we think warrant special attention from investors who are looking to invest across the major economies. And while we don't have time to go into the full results today, a full copy is available on our website for anyone who's interested in the specific index and also the methodology that we've used to compile it.
Yeah, sure. The report noted three major factors that will actually shape Africa's pandemic recovery. Talked about innovation in healthcare, mounting debt pressures, and regional insecurity. Now, could you unpack these for us?
Sure. So the first is actually a positive to emerge from the chaos and the tragedy of the pandemic. And that is that we've seen a significant uptick in terms of investment in health tech and in biotech across the continent. And this brings a number of different benefits. Firstly, of course, to the populations themselves, but also auxiliary benefits that apply to other sectors such as agriculture. And this is a very expensive thing to do. And so the pandemic actually provided the opportunity for investors to pile in resources into this space and look at developing manufacturing capacity and the required scientific research centers in the continent itself. So that has been a positive aspect. Secondly, as you mentioned, we've been looking at the impact upon the growing debt burden upon African governments. And this is not a new phenomenon, but in many places has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And what we see here is that governments are having to adopt increasingly innovative ways to try and either increase income for expanding the fiscal base or other measures, or indeed mitigate the debt that they currently owe through ring fencing or other measures that pertain to the multilateral or bilateral discussions they're having. But ultimately, this points to a concerning trend in that the levels of debt, and in some cases, paradoxically, there's an attempt to spend the way out of the debt that they face, and the impact that that's going to have on their attempts to grow the fiscal base in the future. And then the final trend that we highlight is relating to security, and that's the changing nature of Western, in particular, intervention and military intervention from other nations outside of Africa in the continent. And this has led to a fragmentation in the security environment, and in many ways made the security environment far more complicated for businesses looking to operate.
Now, a country such as Nigeria that has been afflicted with conflict recently and various economic challenges, what is behind the improvement in its reward score, and what do you see hindering its recovery?
Sure. So Nigeria is a very interesting case. And of course, as we noted at the start, we measure both the risk and also the reward. So Nigeria's risk rating has actually deteriorated slightly, which is in recognition of some of the security challenges that we faced over the last year. But the reward factor has increased noticeably. And that is because many of the sectors of the economy which have done relatively well during the pandemic, we're looking at the tech sectors, we're looking at the wider ICT space, we're looking at fintech and telecoms in particular. They have a strong market in Nigeria and tremendous opportunity for growth. You've got a young, tech-savvy population, and so there is tremendous opportunity within those spaces. Conversely, an ongoing challenge for Nigeria is the security environment and the security situation. And we're speaking to investors on a daily basis about this, and it is always top of their list of concerns. The fact that there may be harm that comes to their people, their reputation, or their assets. So that will be the main limiting factor for Nigeria over the coming year.
Now, how are the African governments expected to work with this index to improve its investment climate?
Well, this is one of a number of different tools that governments and investors have and which they can use to look at the comparative benefits of investing in one location or another. I think the first message, and it's perhaps the most obvious one, is that it is a competition. It is comparative. And so economies, like businesses, compete for investment. And it's critical that the foundations are put in place to enable a stable platform for investors to prosper and to do well. And anything that governments are doing in order to further that goal is likely to be well received. We personally believe that some of the most exciting investment opportunities globally exist here on the continent, and indeed very close to home here in Lagos. So there is real potential for optimism there. I think secondly, it's to note that the policy-making decisions that are enacted, while they can seem abstract as they're being formulated and implemented, have a very real impact upon the investment environment on ground. So one of the aspects in Nigeria that we didn't touch upon in the last question is the fact that the PIB has successfully passed through the legislative process, and that has a significant impact upon the investment environment. That stability and that platform that it creates, it is something that investors crave and seek and actively seek out. So again, cause for optimism in that regard as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, team, for your time with us on the program this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Great to be there. Thank you.
Tim Cox is a partner, West Africa at Control Risks. Now, the International Monetary Fund has called for coordinated action and greater accountability to ensure that the world meets a target of vaccinating 40% of people in every country against COVID-19 by the end of 2021. The chief economist at IMF, Jita Guptinath, says India's decision this week to resume vaccine exports was a very important part of the solution, but major economies also had to ratchet up vaccine deliveries to honor their pledges. The IMF in May released a $50 billion proposal that built on efforts by the United Nations, World Health Organization, and other groups to end the COVID-19 pandemic by vaccinating at least 40% of the population in all countries by the end of 2021. And Ghana has been ranked the fourth most attractive labor market in sub-Saharan Africa with regard to the pharmaceutical industry. A report by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, and the Fitch Solutions, a research arm of ratings agency Fitch, says the reason is due to the high urbanization rate and pool of workers available to choose from. According to the report, the increasing urbanization of many parts of the country and the high female labor force participation rate gives businesses in the pharmaceutical industry options to select different groups of workers. The exemption of pharmaceutical products from VAT and other taxes, the report says, will encourage investment in sub-Saharan Africa's pharmaceutical industry. And as the South African Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee set to meet on Thursday, economic analysts expect the central bank to keep the current repo rate given what has been happening with inflation since the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. The central bank has kept the repo rate at 3.5% for the past 6 meetings to help curb the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
We'll expect them to hold interest rates where they are now, given what is happening with the economy, given also what is happening with inflation. And we know that we are getting the last print of inflation today, showing us what happened to our August consumer inflation. But if you look at the previous inflation numbers, taking the July one, which is the one that we have now, I mean, it shows that inflation is still sitting at 4.6%. And remember, as the bank, the central bank, their target is to have inflation between 3 and 6%. So I think given all that, and given that the world economies are not picking up as yet, and we still have the Delta variant, which is impacting on the global economy. So based on that, we think the guys will hold. And to say that let's reduce interest rates. It helps companies when they have to make the repayments on their debts. It helps households when they have to make repayments on their debt. And it also makes it much cheaper for people who are looking to get the new funding, then because for the economy to grow, you need to continue to spend money.
And with that, we draw the curtain on today's edition of the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimize Obi Iwago.